1 Corinthians chapter 9. First lesson. Turn the pointer on if you want to use it. All right. Freedom to forfeit my freedom. I've got the freedom to forfeit my freedom. We're going to look at Paul's right and then Paul's refusal. So those are the two main divisions that we will see in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And the first one, obviously, Paul's right is in verses 1 through 14, where we see Paul still on the topic of freedoms or rights and what we're supposed to do with those. Now, in case you do not remember, we finished chapter 8, and it's the same conversation going on. There's no chapter break. When Paul's actually writing it, he didn't say, oh, it's the end of chapter 8. Okay, let me stop here, and then I'll start a new chapter next time. He just continued writing, so he's got the same mindset going on. And he finished by saying in verse 13 of 1 Corinthians chapter 8, he said, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, my Christian friend or my Christian family member stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. And so we talked about the freedom for the weakest, and how many of us like to press our rights. I've got the right to do this. I've got the right to eat this, or I've got the right to watch this kind of a movie or listen to this kind of music. But what Paul is getting at, and the question that we want to ask ourselves after looking at chapter 8 last week, and then even tonight we'll see it, is what am I willing to sacrifice? I know what I'm willing to fight for, and these are my rights, and this is what I get to do. But what are we willing to sacrifice for others? For someone else's someone else's behalf, or to strengthen somebody's faith, because it may be that we're holding on to some of our rights or freedoms that we have, and it might be tripping some other Christian up, and how are we willing to give up on those, or give those things up? And we'll see that Paul was. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 1. This is where we see Paul's right. And the first thing that he does here in verses 1 and 2 is that he determines his position. Verse 1, am I not an apostle? Now he asks a series of questions that they're all a yes answer. Am I not an apostle? The answer was yes, Paul was. Am I not free? Yes, Paul was free. Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Paul actually saw Jesus Christ. Are you not my work in the Lord? Paul says. The answer was yes. The Corinthians were his work. God was using him to work in the lives of the Corinthians. He says in verse 2, if I am not an apostle, so evidently people were challenging his apostleship and accusing him of not being a real apostle. But Paul says in verse 2, if I am not an apostle to others, yet doubtless I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. So Paul, first of all, as he's talking about his own rights, and we'll get into that a little bit later, the first thing he does is he determines his position. He determines, and everybody, the Corinthians knew this, but he's reminding them that he is an apostle. So he had this position, this position of prominence. Now, it doesn't mean that he was some kind of celebrity, and we learned about that earlier in Corinthians. He didn't want to be treated like anything special or a celebrity at all. But he's trying to make an argument, trying to make his point here. So he starts out by saying, I am an apostle, okay? So to us, it sounds like he's trying to, boost his own confidence or make himself look big. He's like reminding them, I am an apostle, treat me right, or whatever. But we'll see where he goes with this. The next thing he does, beginning at verse 3 down to verse 8, is that he defends his right to benefit from his position. So his position was, he was an apostle. Now what he's going to do for the next several verses is defend his right to benefit from being an apostle. This sounds kind of weird. Where's he going with this? I don't get it. But let's continue reading on. Verse 3. My defense to those who examine me is this. So there were people who were kind of had him under the microscope and like, is this guy even a real apostle? Verse 4. What he does right now is he's going to ask a series of common sense questions. Some common sense questions. Verse 4. do we have no right to eat and drink? What he means is, do we not have the right to eat and drink whatever we want? The answer was, yeah, you do have the right. Verse 5, do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? That was Peter, another name for Peter. Paul's second question is, listen, do we not have the right to marry to marry a lady, to get married? And then he points out that the other apostles have wives, and even the brothers, the which would have been really the half-brothers of Jesus. And then he goes on to say even Cephas, or Peter, who was considered to be a leader, if not the leader of the church. And he says they all have wives. And so he's asking, I mean, we're apostles. And he's going to talk about Barnabas in just a moment, in case you're wondering, like, who's he talking about we? He means him and Barnabas. They didn't have wives. And so he's saying, hey, don't we have the right to have wives also? We're apostles. All the other apostles do. Verse 6, he asks another question. Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? What's that all about? He's asking the question. He says, all these other people the other apostles that I mentioned, they are supported by the ministry. They're not working. They don't have other jobs. He says, is there like special rules for Barnabas and I that we can't live the same way? We can't benefit from the ministry. In other words, make preaching our full-time job. He says, are we the only ones that can't do that? In case you did not know, Paul was a tent maker by trade. A tent maker. He actually made tents. And it is believed that he would do that and then sell the tents in order to support his own ministry, his own preaching. So he wasn't getting money from a church, and there were times when churches would support him and give him money. But his main source of income was not from being a leader in the church. It was not from being a preacher. His main source of income was from his own job. He had his own business, making tents and then selling those so that he could fund his own preaching. Pretty incredible. And Paul says, look, are we the only ones that, we're not allowed to do this? Verse 7, still asking questions. Whoever goes to war at his own expense. Okay, so he's going to use several examples here. Some of you in here are no doubt going to go to the military after graduation. Anybody in here planning to go to the military already? You're like, okay, some of you are. You've already got that. That's already in your sights. You already know what you're going to do. Those few of you that raise your hands, you know that you're not going to show up to boot camp and they say, okay, buddy, where's the money for these fatigues? We're not just giving out free clothing here. You want a haircut? You got to pay for it. You want some food? You got to pay for it. You want to sleep in our beds? You better pay for it. The military pays for that. The government pays for that. They're supporting you as you're dedicating your life to that type of service. And so he asked the question here in verse 7, who goes to war at his own expense? What he's pointing out is, are there soldiers that just pay for themselves to go to war? Nobody does that. They belong to an army, and people, the government or the army, the military funds them. Unless you're Teddy Roosevelt, then you just put together your own little military and go out on the attack because they won't let you join the military and fund it yourself. But the general rule is that you join the military, they take care of you. Verse 7, he asks another question. Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit? Anybody that plants a vineyard is going to eat some of the grapes, right? Or maybe drink some of the wine at the end of the process. He asks another question. Who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock? So you've got a flock of goats. Who's going to do that but not partake of the goat milk? Anybody in here like goat milk? Yes. Look at that. Amen. These are the godly people right here. Okay? Goat milk. Love goat milk. But it is high in cholesterol, so I can't drink too much of it. But who would have a flock of goats and then not partake of the goat milk? It doesn't make any sense. Or a different kind of an animal. You've got cows. You've got milk cows, and who's going to have milk cows and then not drink some of the milk? Who's going to have chickens and not eat some of the eggs? Come on, that would be ungodly to not eat the eggs, right? We wouldn't do that. That doesn't make any sense. It makes sense that somebody who goes to war, they don't pay their own expense. It would make sense that somebody who plants a vineyard partakes of the fruit. It would make sense that somebody who's got a flock, animals with milk, would partake of the milk. That all makes sense. Verse 8, do I say these things as a mere man? Or does not the law say the same also? That's just the general, that's how it works. Some of you, no doubt, have a garden at home, a vegetable garden. And you wouldn't have that garden, tend it, water it, take care of it, and then not eat any of the produce from it, any of the fruits or any of the vegetables. You wouldn't do that. You've got this garden, you take care of it, you dedicate your time, and so you partake of it. Now, the point that Paul is trying to make here with all of these questions is, he's an apostle, and he has the right, as a servant of God, as a church leader, to be supported by the ministry, like your own youth pastor, like Pastor Chris. I'm supported here. We were just talking about it. Those of you that were with us on Sunday morning, remember we were in Leviticus, and we were talking about this, about how the priests partake, and it's going to be a trip, what we see here in just a few minutes, pertaining to that. But Pastor Chris is supported by the church, and that happens as your families give. As they give money, it goes into the church, and the church funnels it out to different things to pay for different things, like to keep the lights on, or pay for electricity, and to buy us a vacuum so that we can clean up all the crumbs after you guys leave, and all the different stuff, the equipment that we have, everything. And then a portion of that goes to me, and it goes into my gas tank, and it goes to pay for my light bill at home, and for my lawnmower, or just the different things. That's how I'm supported. Okay? And Paul is saying, listen, somebody who's serving God in that way, they've got the right to be supported monetarily that way. Okay? But he's not done with his argument yet. Okay? Verse 9, what he does, the next thing that he does, he's again, remember, he's defending his right to benefit from his position as an apostle. And the first thing he did in defending was he asked some common sense questions, okay? The next thing that he does is he gives some confirmation from the OT. Everybody knows what that is, right? Overtime. Not overtime, Old Testament, okay? Old Testament. Verse 9. For it is written in the law of Moses. Now he quotes Deuteronomy 25:4 here. And he says this. This is what Deuteronomy 25:4 says. You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Makes sense, right? Or does it? Does anybody not know what in the world that means? Anybody brave enough to say, yeah, I don't really know what in the world you're talking about? Everybody else knows? Okay, you don't. So a couple of you don't know. Thank you very much for your honesty. It was the saying is, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. A muzzle, I think everybody knows what a muzzle is, right? That would go over an animal's mouth or snout, the mouth area, to keep it from, you put a muzzle on a dog so that it doesn't bark or bite. Okay? A muzzle over an ox would keep it from eating the grain. But God established this way back in the Old Testament. He says the ox, if it's treading the grain, it's in the, I can't remember what it's called, but it's treading out the grain. Don't muzzle the ox so that it can eat some of the grain that it's treading. In other words, it's working. Allow it to partake of that produce. Okay? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. And then Paul asks this question at the end of verse 9. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Now, certainly God is concerned about oxen. He certainly is. God actually likes animals. As you read through the scriptures, you find out that God cares for the animals. But is that what God is concerned with here? Is that what he's talking about? Verse 10. Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. He's borrowing all of these images from different areas. Later on in the chapter, he'll borrow an image from sports. We'll get to that at a later time. But what he's doing right now is he used this image from the animal kingdom, from a farmer's perspective. If you've got an ox that's working, allow it to eat. Verse 10, he who plows should plow in hope. Plowing. When you are plowing an area of land, why are you plowing? Does anybody know why you plow the dirt? Anybody know why you plow? What do you think? Yes, Elijah, thank you very much. To prepare it for seeding. You're going to plant some seeds there. Okay? And the point that he's making in verse 10 is the person that plows should plow in hope of receiving some of that produce. They're plowing. They're going to plant some seeds, whatever kind of produce they're going to put in there, vegetables, whatever they're going to do. They should expect in hope, they should be hoping for some of that produce. And he who threshes in hope, that was when they would thresh the wheat. And as I understand it, they had a couple of different ways of doing that, but that was separating the wheat and the chaff, the good stuff from the bad stuff. In verse 10, he says, the person that threshes, that's doing the work, should be partaker of that work. In other words, they're threshing the wheat. They should expect to receive some of that wheat. Okay? He's still making the point. He's saying, I'm an apostle. I'm doing this spiritual work. I've got the right to receive money from that work. Verse 11, if we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? Is it that big of a deal? If we're feeding you spiritually, is it a bad thing, or is it a big deal if we receive money for that? Verse 12, if others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? We've been working with you, Corinthians. We've invested our lives. Don't we deserve some money also? Verse 12, nevertheless, we have not used this right. There it is. Leading up to this point, Paul has been saying, listen, Barnabas, I'm an apostle. Barnabas and I were serving God. And don't we deserve to receive some money for this? Some people would say no. Some people would they'd say no. So, pastors, they shouldn't be getting paid for what they do. They should just live in the field next door and just be homeless. I mean, isn't that what the pastor life is all about? Like, shouldn't they just be take a vow of poverty and not get any money? And certainly we have seen some pastors who have received way too much money. I would suggest to you that if one of these days I buy my own private jet from all the money that I'm making here at this church, then there might be a problem. If I can afford to buy my own private jet, there might be a problem. I might have a problem with spending. You might be paying me too much. Now, I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. I won't be making enough money to buy a private jet anytime soon. I'm just content with my little Volkswagen. I'm good with that. But Paul is saying here, we're servants and we're doing a spiritual work, and we've got the right to receive money for that. But here's the punchline in verse 12. He says, nevertheless, okay? Now, all those things that you've just heard, nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things, lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Now, the big picture is that Paul is talking about rights. I've got the right to do this. I've got the right to do that. And Paul says, well, hey, you want an example? I'm an apostle, and I've got the right to receive money for the spiritual work that I'm doing. He says, however, I forego that right. I've got the freedom to forfeit that freedom. and he says we don't receive money. He'll say it plainly in just a little bit, but he's saying, listen, we don't get paid for what we do. We have not used this right, but endure all things, lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. In other words, he says we're paying our own way so that nobody will trip. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? When I say trip, we're paying our own way so that nobody will trip. Don't trip, right? Don't trip, potato chip. Don't give me any business about this, because we're paying our own way. What are you going to say about that? Verse 13. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple? Those of you that have been here for Leviticus, does this sound familiar? He borrows this example from the Old Testament. He says, do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the altar? Now, so you've been with me, some of you have been with me on Sunday morning, and we've been going through Leviticus, and you're like, why are we reading this? Those offerings, and, he gets the right thigh, and he gets the, this, and he's getting what, and take the fat and do it, and why does he get a piece of bread, or why does he get this, this loaf, or these, why does he get all of this stuff? And now, all of a sudden, because you've learned those things over the last several weeks, when Paul uses that as an example, and he says, listen, don't you know that those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the altar? You and I go, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because God established that way back when he was setting up the priesthood. He told the priests and he told the people, the priests are there serving all day. They don't have time to go home and work some other job. They're serving all day. So what God did was he set up in those offerings, he set up this thing where the priest could have certain portions of some of the offerings that people would bring. God set that up. They had something called a heave offering, and the individual, they would heave it up to the Lord, and then they would give it to the priest. And they had something called a wave offering. They would wave it before the Lord, and they would offer it to him symbolically, and then they would give it to the priest. So the priests who were doing the spiritual work, they were supported. They were able to conduct their lives. I was pointing this out on Sunday, that the priests were not. They were not. A lot of times in religions today, even modern day religions today, the spiritual leaders, the priests, or whatever you want to, whatever the leaders might be called in that particular religion, they are expected to take a vow of celibacy, to never get married, to not have a family. They're to be dedicated 100% to the Lord. But that is not what God set up. In fact, the priests had their own families. And how were those priests supposed to support their own families if they're at the tabernacle all day and they're serving and they can't go off and work? Where are they supposed to get money from, or food, or clothing? Where are they supposed to get that stuff from? We saw in our study of Leviticus that the priests, on one of the offerings, they could take the skin of the animal. And you go, a skin? Who wants a skin? Well, they would take that and use that they'd had different uses for the animal skin. Maybe some of it was being used for parts of clothing, maybe shoes for their kids. So those priests were supported by the priesthood, by the ministry, by the people that were coming and offering these animals and different things. They were able to support themselves from that. So it's something that God established a long time ago. And Paul is simply making the point here that, listen, this is something that God established. Spiritual leaders can receive money for their work. How are they supposed to do what they do? How are they supposed to make that happen? But Paul has already pointed out in verse 12, yeah, we've got the right to receive stuff. He said, but we don't. We don't. And in verse 14, he says this, even so, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. Those who preach the gospel, in other words, those that are doing the spiritual work, those that are doing the preaching, those that are doing the teaching, they should be able to make a living from that. Now, I've told you before, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was not born a pastor. I didn't get saved till I was 20 years old. And up until the time that I was 20, I was not saved and had other types of jobs. And then even after I got saved, I had other jobs. And I didn't go, I went on staff at a church a long time ago, many years ago. But I was, I came on staff from, I was working at a recycling place. Before that, I was working for a car, an automotive garage, changing tires, doing oil changes, doing things like that. But I was already getting involved in ministry, and then from there I moved on to a different company. It was a recycling company, and I worked for the recycling company, and then I was still volunteering my time as much as I could, being in the ministry, and then eventually I went on staff at a church. But when I went on staff at the church, I didn't go on staff as a pastor. They didn't pick me up. They didn't say, Chris, come on, we want you to be a pastor. They hired me to be the janitor, to do maintenance, to clean toilets, to vacuum, to dust things. That's what I went on staff to do. And then I'm working at a church and I'm volunteering. At the same time, I was volunteering my time with the junior high ministry. So working at a church and volunteering with the junior high ministry. And the first year that I went on staff with the church, the youth pastor, he says, hey, I want to take you on the Mexico mission trip, because he was planning to leave all along, and he wanted me to take over his position. And he said, I want you to go on the Mexico mission trip. And so he went over to go talk to the pastor that was basically my boss, and he goes, hey, listen, I want Chris to go with me on the Mexico mission trip. And the pastor said, no, he's not going on with you to no mission trip. And Jason says, what are you talking about? He's volunteering with the youth, we want to get him involved in ministry. We want him to go on the Mexico mission trip. The pastor said, no, that's not what I hired him for. I hired him to clean. So no, he can't go on the Mexico mission trip. And it was like, if I didn't work at the church, I could have just taken vacation and gone on the Mexico mission trip. It would have been easier. But that's what God was doing at the time. And it wasn't until I was there for a long time before they ordained me or made me a pastor, which basically means they handed me a piece of paper that's at the bottom of my desk drawer right now somewhere, and I could probably fish it out. It's down there somewhere. Really doesn't mean much. It just means that I can do a wedding now, and it's official pretty much. But it was a long time before that happened. And then once that happened, then I was able to dedicate all of my time to the ministry. And then eventually, after a while, I came over here, ended up over here. And I don't know if you knew this or not. I'm sharing this with you. I don't know do you want to know this? I'll tell you anyways. That I'm here full time. This is what I do. This is what I do. And I spend time during the week, as much time as I can, preparing for the messages on Wednesday night and on Sunday morning. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, or you just figure, well, I don't know, this is what he does. I don't know what he does. But I spend as many hours as I can throughout the week preparing for this. And then there are other things that I do here at the office, and things that I do here in the high school rooms. There's just various things, but I'm here full time. And that's something that God set up a long time ago. He did that a long time ago, that the spiritual leaders should be able to do that full time and be supported. Now, the thing is that Paul here is saying, listen, we're the spiritual leaders, and we have the right to be supported monetarily. But we're going to like this about Paul. Paul's refusal. Look at verse 15. Verses 15 through 18, what we learn is that Paul refused payment. But I have used none of these things, nor have I written these things, that it should be done so to me. I'll explain. These verses are a little bit hard to understand, and it helped me out a lot when I was studying to go look at the New Living Translation. It made these things a lot clearer for me. I'll explain these things, so if I read through them and you're kind of like, what? I don't understand, I'll explain for you. He says in verse 15, let me go ahead and read it. But I have used none of these things, nor have I written these things, that it should be done so to me. He says, I've not received payment, and I'm not writing these things so that you can start paying me. He says, for it would be better for me to die than that anyone should make my boasting void. What he's saying there is, listen, Paul says it's actually better if I were to just go ahead and die, rather than for you guys to start paying me, and then you take away that privilege of me paying to preach. Paul paid to preach. You know, I get paid to be here. So when I go out to officiate a wedding, or sometimes I have to do funerals, or if I go to speak at someone's camp, or just different things like that, I never charge. I don't need to charge because I'm already getting paid. I get paid from the church. There's no price for that. It's free of charge. And sometimes it gets to the point. I did a funeral just a while back, not too long ago, and the lady it seemed like she just about was ready to fight with me. And I was saying, no, I was like, no, it's okay. No, you don't, we go to the same church here. You don't need to pay me. I get paid already. It was during the week. It's like I'm getting paid to be here already. No, take it. It's okay. No, take it. All right, I'll take it. But that happens sometimes. But it's not required. It's free. This is what I do. Being able to go and bless somebody, to say, no, I'm coming for free, man. I'm doing it for free, and I want to bless you. You ain't got to pay me nothing. That was Paul's attitude. Verse 16. For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of. For necessity is laid upon me. If I'm preaching the gospel, he's saying I can't brag about myself. It's the necessity of it. It's laid on me. The gospel's laid on me. He says, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. I got to preach the gospel. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward. So if this preaching thing is my own desire, then okay, I get the payment, that's my reward, all right, great. He says, but if it's against my will. And what he means is that Paul didn't choose to be a Bible teacher. God chose Paul to be a Bible teacher. And Paul says in verse 17, he says, I have been entrusted with a stewardship. I didn't choose this. It was given to me. It was chosen for me. And just so you know, I never wanted to be a pastor. That was never my desire. Still don't. It's easier being a janitor. It wasn't something that I asked for. It was something that was given. God chose me to do this. And it's a necessity. It's a stewardship. Verse 18. What is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel. You see, the whole point that Paul is getting at here, and we're almost finished, got a few more verses. Paul is saying, I have the right to receive benefits, and what he means is money. He says, however, I reject that money. I refuse the payment. The next thing that he does, he says, listen, Paul's refusal of personal desires. He says, for though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew. So he didn't do what he wanted to do. He lived like a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, those who are following the law, hardcore, he says, as under the law. I live like I was under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law. Those who weren't living under the law, I lived like somebody that wasn't living under the law. Not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without the law. What he means there is, he says there are some people who live as if there is no law of God. They don't live their lives according to the law of God. He said, so I live like them. But then he makes it clear. He says, that doesn't mean I'm just lawless and out there being disobedient to God. I still live my life according to Christ. To those who are, verse 22, to the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker of it with you. See, so Paul's saying, listen, I put aside my personal desires. I set aside the payment. I don't want that. And I set aside my own personal desires. What Paul wanted to do with his life no longer mattered to Paul. He gave that up. He gave that up. And that's what happens in the service of God, is that you give up the things that you want to do. My kids have all played sports. My youngest daughter still does, and there have been lots of times, where I've had to miss their games or their meets. All of them ran cross country at different times, and I had to miss those things. There were times when they had school stuff going on, awards, or they had different things going on, and I had to miss those. I try my very best to make it to as many of those as I can, to be on the sidelines cheering, yelling. When they ran cross country, I would go from, I wasn't allowed to just take off from working at the other church and just go. I had to use my lunchtime, and I did it gladly. So I would wait, and it was like, okay, as their race is getting ready to start, then I would jump in my car and I would speed, not break the law, but I would speed down baseline to the other end of, get to the high school just in time, and I jump out. Okay, they're going, and bam, the gun goes off, and here they go, they're running, and I'm out there cheering like, come on, let's go, come on, pass that guy up. And then as soon as they were done, I'm back in the car and I'm jumping. I'm trying to rush back to get back to the church in time to, get there so that I'm not going over on my lunch hour or whatever. But I did those things gladly. But there were lots of times when I had to miss stuff. And still to this day, my daughter still plays soccer, and there have been times when I've had to miss it, because I'm here, or because something's going on at the church, or some kind of ministry thing or whatever. There's been times when I've had to miss certain family events because I've got to study, and it's spilled over into the weekend, and I got to be ready for Sunday. Sorry, I can't make it, can't go. And that just happens. You don't always just get to do whatever it is that you want. And Paul is saying that. He says, listen, I set aside the payment. I set aside the personal desires in order to serve other people. And the last thing that he did at verses 24 to 27 is that he refused perishable crowns. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? There's only one winner. Run in such a way that you may obtain it. Run like a wild man. Run hard. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things, self-controlled. That's what he means. Athletes, the very best athletes, are self-controlled in what they consume. Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the, he's a very well-known soccer player right now, and I think one of the, not just me, but he's one of the greatest. Lives on a very strict diet. Does not eat sugars, doesn't drink alcohol. Eats the same thing every day. Eats 6 times a day. Eats the same thing every single day. Very strict diet. But he's one of the best. And you can go from person to person, all the different athletes and different people. Those that are the best, they're self-disciplined. He says in verse 25, and everyone who competes for the prize is self-disciplined, temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. They do it to win an earthly crown. We're doing it for a spiritual crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. I don't run with uncertainty. I'm certain. I know. I'm focused. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air. This is no shadow boxing here. Paul says I'm fighting for real. And then in verse 27, he finishes by saying, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. He says, listen, I've set aside self-indulgence. I don't just do what I want and go where I want and watch what I want and listen to what I want. I do things for the benefit of others. I do things for the glory of God. I do things for a spiritual crown. And what an example for you and I. That Paul, as he's talking about rights and freedoms, and you and I, man, we know what our rights and freedoms are. I've got the right to you can't judge me, right? Like Tupac, only God can judge me. You can't judge me. Nobody can judge me. And we have that attitude like, man, I can do whatever I want, say whatever I want, go wherever I want, wear whatever I want, watch whatever I want, listen to whatever I want. I can hang out with whoever I want and nobody can judge me. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe you do have the freedom to do that. But are you willing to give up any of those things if it's causing your Christian brother or sister to stumble, if it's causing them to doubt, if it's causing their faith to be shaky? Are you willing to give any of that up? Because Paul was, and Paul was an apostle, and he had the right to receive money, and he had the right to all these benefits, but he forfeited all of those things in order to be a blessing to other people. That's his point. That's his point. And you and I have got to check our hearts and say, man, what am I willing to sacrifice? Jesus himself said about himself, he said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Now, if Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve other people, better bet that that's what I want my life to be about other people, serving other people, giving up my payment if I need to. I'll come here and preach for free. I'll do that. Don't tell Pastor Stewart because he might not pay me anymore. But personal desires, giving up the perishable crowns. Listen, if Paul could do that, man, I want to be about that too. Father, thank you so much.